Last night, you probably dreamed about something completely ordinary. Missing a flight, forgetting your pants in public, talking to someone from high school you haven't thought about in 10 years. You woke up, shook it off, and forgot most of it within minutes. That's normal. That's expected. But the real answer to where that dream came from and why your brain bothers to build it at all is far stranger than anything that actually happened inside it. For most of human history, people didn't ignore their dreams the way you do. They built entire belief systems around them. They made decisions based on them. They believed dreams were messages from ancestors, warnings from gods, or visits from the dead. For a long time, scientists assumed all of that was nonsense, that dreaming was just cultural noise, a side effect of a brain doing overnight maintenance and nothing more. Random firing, static, a movie playing to an empty theater. Then, in 1953, a graduate student named Eugene Aserinsky hooked his 8-year-old son Armand up to outdated lab equipment at the University of Chicago, mostly because he needed a willing test subject, and his son was nearby. He watched the boy's eyes dart rapidly behind closed eyelids. He assumed the machine was broken. It wasn't. He had just discovered what we now call REM sleep, the stage where almost all vivid dreaming happens, working alongside his advisor, Nathaniel Kleitman, to confirm it. Without meaning to, he had opened a door science is still walking through. What he found changed something fundamental. Dreaming wasn't random noise. It had a rhythm. It had a structure. It cycled through the night with almost mechanical precision. Your brain wasn't shutting down while you slept. In some ways, it was working harder than it does while you're awake, scanning, rendering, simulating. So what exactly was it simulating? Here's where it gets stranger. A psychologist named Antti Revonsuo proposed something in the year 2000 that still unsettles people the first time they hear it. He argued dreaming didn't evolve to process your day, sort your memories, or hand you symbolic riddles to solve over coffee. He argued it evolved as a survival simulator, a rehearsal space, a flight simulator for your nervous system. Except instead of practicing landings, your ancestors were practicing not dying. Think about what that actually means. Every single night, for hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors' brains ran threat scenarios while their bodies lay completely defenseless on the ground, being chased, being attacked, falling from a height, losing the people they depended on to survive. Revonsuo called this threat simulation theory, and it suggests your brain has been quietly running drills since long before written language existed. Drills your ancestors needed because the wrong kind of unprepared morning could be the only morning they got. This isn't just a clever theory dressed up to sound dramatic. Decades earlier, a researcher named Calvin Hall, working with Robert Van de Castle, built one of the largest dream archives ever assembled. They collected and carefully coded thousands of dreams from people across wildly different cultures, decades, and continents. And the same handful of scenarios kept surfacing again and again, almost regardless of who the dreamer was. Being chased, falling, teeth falling out, being naked in front of strangers, drowning. Why would a teenager in Tokyo, a farmer in rural Brazil, and an office worker in Ohio all gravitate toward the same narrow set of nightmares? Coincidence doesn't explain a pattern that consistent across people who have never met and never will. A shared, ancient survival script does. Now picture your actual ancestors Not the polished version from museum dioramas. The real ones. Sleeping in the open or barely sheltered. Surrounded by predators that could smell them in the dark, and rivals who might steal their food, their territory, or their mate while their guard was down. For them, falling wasn't a metaphor for losing control. It was what happened when you slipped from the tree you'd climbed for safety. Being chased wasn't generalized anxiety. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Their dreaming brains weren't being dramatic. They were being efficient, rehearsing worst-case outcomes in a space where the stakes were imagined instead of real, so that if the worst case ever actually arrived, some part of their nervous system had already walked through it once before. There's an even stranger thread running through this. A folklorist named David Hufford spent years documenting something called sleep paralysis, a state where your mind wakes up before your body does, leaving you conscious but unable to move. Across cultures that had no contact with one another, separated by oceans and centuries, people described almost the exact same hallucination. A crushing weight on the chest, a sense of a malevolent presence standing just out of view, an intruder in the room. Different cultures gave it different names. An old hag sitting on the sleeper's chest, a demon, a shadow figure, but the core experience was nearly identical everywhere it was reported. Why would brains on opposite sides of the planet, with no shared mythology, independently invent the same intruder? Because it isn't an invention. It's the same ancient threat detector, misfiring at the exact boundary between sleep and waking, defaulting to the one shape it has always defaulted to. Something is here, and it means you harm. That's the oldest alarm your brain owns. Here's the twist most people don't expect. You'd think modern life, soft beds, locked doors, no leopards waiting in the dark, would have quietly switched this whole system off by now. It hasn't. A neuroscientist named Jerome Siegel spent years studying 3 of the last remaining hunter-gatherer and forager societies on Earth: the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tsimane of Bolivia. He wanted to know what sleep actually looked like before electricity, before mattresses, before any of the comforts you take completely for granted. What he found was that their nights, measured in raw brain activity, weren't wildly different from yours. The proportion of the night spent in REM sleep, the same stage Aserinsky stumbled into back in 1953, stayed remarkably consistent. The hardware hadn't changed at all. Only the world running on top of it had. So the ancient threat simulator is still installed in your skull right now, fully operational, just running on outdated source material. It no longer has leopards to model. It no longer has rival tribes or sudden weather shifts that could mean starvation by morning. So it improvises, it builds new monsters out of whatever your actual life feeds it. This is why you don't dream about saber-toothed cats. You dream about being unprepared for an exam you finished studying for a decade ago. You dream about your phone refusing to work when you desperately need to make a call. You dream about showing up to work in your underwear or losing your teeth one by one in front of a silent, watching crowd. Your ancestors needed to rehearse physical danger. You mostly face social and psychological danger instead. Embarrassment, failure, exclusion, loss of status. Your brain doesn't know the difference between the two. It only knows there's a threat-shaped hole that needs filling, and it fills it with whatever feels most dangerous to you specifically. That's also probably why anxiety dreams spike right before something that genuinely matters to you. A wedding, a job interview, a flight you can't afford to miss. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it has always done, running the worst version of tomorrow tonight in a space where failure costs you nothing real, so that some small, ancient part of you walks into the actual moment, slightly less unprepared. It isn't malfunctioning. It's doing its job a little too literally for a world that no longer contains the predators it was originally built to model. There's something almost moving about that, if you sit with it for a second. The fear that wakes you at 3 a.m, heart pounding over something that, by daylight, seems almost embarrassing to have been scared of, isn't a glitch in the system. It's an inheritance. It's the exact same circuitry that kept a small, slow, mostly defenseless primate alive long enough to eventually become you. The setting has changed completely. Caves became apartments. Predators became deadlines and presentations, and the fear of being left out. But the machinery underneath never got the memo. And in its own clumsy way, it's still trying to protect you using the only language it has ever known. So the next time you wake up shaken by a dream that, in the cold light of morning, looks almost silly, missing a flight, losing your teeth, showing up somewhere completely unprepared, you're not looking at nonsense. You're looking at the same survival system your ancestors depended on to make it through a far harder world, still running tonight, just aimed at a different kind of danger now. Last night, you probably dreamed about something completely ordinary. Missing a flight, forgetting your pants in public. But there was nothing ordinary about the machinery that built it. That machinery is older than language, older than fire, older than almost everything you would ever call human. And it has been quietly rehearsing your survival every single night since long before you were born.